Welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. Happy Friday. I hope you have great plans for the long weekend if you're watching this live. First thing I want to do is I want to just say thanks so much for watching Foresight TV. We are so glad you are joining us for this broadcast. At Foresight, we're committed to improving the lives of people who live in, work, and senior living. And you already know that, right? We produce all kinds of great thought leadership content in addition to Foresight TV. There's LinkedIn posts, there's Foresight podcasts, Tech Tuesday, and perhaps more impactful is the Foresight website where we publish new content every day. It's free and easy to subscribe to. Two ways for you to do that right now. You can see the QR code up on the screen, or which you can simply scan with your mobile device and sign up, or there is a link in chat that you can use to join our mail list. I just can't tell how much I appreciate your passion for our industry, the people you serve. I know you are making a difference every day, or you would not be a part of this audience. There's one more thing I want to talk to you about. We are so excited. Earlier this week on LinkedIn, we announced a brand new, our first ever conference that is not really a conference. We're calling it the Foresight AI Lab. You attend this and you will walk away with a solid action plan to use AI in your organization. If you're not using it at all, and if you're already using it, you'll come away with ideas about how to use it better. You'll be more effective. This will be a learning session. It will not be high-level stuff. You will walk away with an action plan. You can sign up for our email list to get more information as we release it. Again, the link is in the chat. And now we are on with the show. Today's episode is a conversation with Lois Cormack, which I recorded with her about a week ago because she was not able to make this day and time work. I hope you enjoy watching as much as I enjoyed doing the interview. And with that, on with the show. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. I am so excited to be talking to Lois Cormack. I first met her when I was speaking in Canada a number of years ago. We did a video interview. You've had a lot change in your life. We've had a lot change in senior living. And so, Lois, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you were able to have this conversation with me today. So let's start with a little bit about who you are and your organization.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I'm very happy to be back and having another conversation with you. I think that was probably almost 10 years ago at an Ontario Retirement Communities Association where we were in a conversation. So delighted to see you again. So yeah, you're right. A lot has changed. At that time, I believe I was the CEO of Sienna Senior Living, which is one of Canada's largest and only publicly traded companies in Canada, with both retirement residences and long-term care homes. After I left Sienna, I teamed up with a few partners and we started what we call Spring Living Retirement Communities. So we started in 2021 with 2 retirement communities, and we now have 22 retirement communities in Ontario and in Quebec. We call ourselves kind of a value add. Our strategy is value add, where we acquire underperforming retirement residences in urban markets. So we focus on primary and secondary markets. And we essentially do huge turnarounds through improving the operation, building up the team, and then CapEx, very strategic capital deployment to improve the resident experience, improve the team member experience, and really provide a nice environment for all of our residents to enjoy. And what we try to do, Steve, is we call ourselves more mid-market. So we would be focusing on, retirement residents that might be 20, 25 years old. We really invest in some good capital, building up the team, as I said, and really improve the resident and team member experience, as well as, obviously, when you do that, you improve the operating performance of the retirement residents. At the same time, specifically occupancy, revenue, and net operating income. So that's the strategy. We have 22 residences right now. We just closed on 7 more last month, and it's a very exciting time. We now have a Montreal office and a Toronto office, and a very large team. We have about 1,200 suites, a mix of studios and AL, memory care, independent supportive living, some purpose-built, and others that we've converted. But we do offer the full continuum of care and services, all private pay.
So one of the things that occurs to me is that I want to dig into what you're doing, what specifics of what you do to turn these communities around. I mean, I think that we see somebody posted on LinkedIn this sort of story over the weekend where they talked about how, and I don't know whether this was real or theoretical, but how investment groups will go out and buy these relatively small senior living, assisted living communities, 35, 40 building units in a small rural community that has a great executive director. The financials are wonderful. And then one day, 2, 3 years down the road, the executive director leaves. And of course, you know, when you have a small building like that, losing 3 or 4 residents becomes a major disaster, and how it becomes really hard to recover from that. And so his solution was they at that time they have to sell it. But my thinking was, well, you just got to go find another executive director. But it's all about the culture, right? But before I get into what you're doing on that culture side of things, because I think that's really the lessons that you have for us today, I'd like to talk a little bit about senior living in Canada and how it's different than in the US to the extent you can speak to that, how it's the same. And then my sense is there's quite a bit of variability from province to province in Canada, much more so than in the States.
Yeah, well, thank you, Steve. So just on that observation, you know, what you heard over the weekend. So I suspect that's the case. Our strategy is quite different. We focus on primary and secondary markets. So large urban centers, the minimum that we would have is about 100 suites. The largest is 300 suites. The key is that they're value add, where we can add value. They're underperforming for whatever reason, occupancy, operations, culture, management, or more often than not, it's just a private owner operator who wants to sell his business. And he wants it to go to a smaller company rather than a large company. So for us, we're not ever in a situation where we're relying on one executive director to carry the performance of the asset. We have a very strong Spring Living Retirement corporate team. We have really strong processes and systems so that when we go in and acquire a property, we evaluate. We always take the team that's there. We evaluate their capacity. If we need to make a change in one of the leaders, we would do that. Or if the executive director leaves and goes, you know, somewhere else, we have the capacity to hire new, train them, and put all of our systems and processes in place, which, you know, we're always hiring for fit. You can teach some skills, whether it's a weakness in budgeting or financials. You can teach that, but you cannot teach someone how to love or be passionate about working with seniors.
Yep.
So we always hire for fit and attitude and you know, passion for the business.
So let's dig into, so how do you figure out the fit?
Well, we usually, I mean, you can tell a lot from a CV and, you know, how often the person's moved and where they've been. In Canada, this is, you know, you asked about what is the differences between Canada and the US. Canada is very small. All of us that have been in senior living for some time all know each other, and we're all friends. So we may be competitors in certain markets, but we're friends, we're friendly. And so we all know each other, or if, you know, you're hiring somebody, you can always find out quickly, you can check references. but we always meet in person. We never hire a leader without meeting them in person. So we don't hire after the days of, the pandemic. We quit hiring by Zoom or Teams or whatever. We hire in person. There's usually a couple of interviews, with the site leader, with our executive team or our corporate team, and really understand and ask a lot of questions, behavioral questions and so on, really looking for fit and how they would handle situations and what they've done in the past.
So when you hire sort of executive director role, I assume you're hiring people who already have experience typically, or do you ever hire outside?
We do. We often hire, we love to promote from within and grow our own and train them. But we will often hire externally. We prefer someone with experience, but we also will and have continued to do this. Someone who's been a leader of, perhaps we call them an office manager, or, he or she has had the opportunity to work as an executive director on an interim basis. Or if we're hiring a regional, they may have done it on an interim basis. So they've had some exposure to it. They like it. They want to grow. They're keen. We're willing and often do this. We'll put them in a smaller property of maybe 80 to 100 suites where they can have, a couple of roles, office manager, combined office manager, executive director. And then we provide them with the support of another executive director until they're feeling very confident. And then they'll grow with us.
Yeah. Cool. So how long does it typically, when you take over one of these challenged properties where you can do a lot of value add, how long does it typically take to turn it around?
Well, it depends on the property and what the issue is. We acquired a couple that were really just needed some much stronger management practices and processes, a marketing strategy rather than just relying on word of mouth. So just putting in a whole marketing strategy. Within, I would say, 8 months to a year, we had taken the occupancy from 85 to 95, 96, less than a year, just with, because the assets were good. They didn't need a lot of CapEx at the time. The team was fine, was save and accept a couple, but it wasn't a lot. We've had others, that we've been at it 2 years and there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah. So
there's no silver bullet. It all depends on, culture and fit, your ability to recruit the right people and figure out what's going on in that community. We always look at where we are in relation to the competition and try to position ourselves uniquely. And we do that by offering additional services, becoming maybe all, in one case, we had a really nice bungalow in a very urban market. There was no AL or memory care around us. And so we converted that building all to AL and memory care, and it's been extremely successful.
And is the regulation and sort of how it operates, how is that different in Canada than the US? I know it varies quite a bit from province to province, or has it become more and more the same?
No, it varies from province to province. Each province has some sort of regulatory authority that oversees. We only do senior living. We don't do any funded long-term care, or in the US, I guess the equivalent of a SNF. But all of the senior living residences are regulated either through a government agency or self-regulated through an industry association that we pay dues to. And they would then, it's like a third party to government, I guess. We pay them dues. They come in and inspect us. You have to meet minimum standards. And it's the whole idea behind it is to prevent, resident abuse or financial abuse or anything like that, to make sure that you're providing a good standard of care and services. And each province is different, but each province is regulated in that manner. There are a few provinces that will subsidize. They'll give a tax credit to the senior. If they need care and services, they will evaluate what they need, and they will help to fund not the accommodation, but the care part, which enables them to live in a retirement or a senior living longer and to avoid moving to long-term care. So that's an excellent policy in Quebec. We're advocating that in other provinces right now across the country for a similar policy, rather than like Ontario, for example, where we have a number of retirement residences. That policy doesn't exist. And so once a senior requires a lot of care and services, and if they can't afford it, then they have to move to a long-term care home, which, the quality of life is quite the same. And it is disruptive because it requires a move. And in addition, there's like a wait list of 40,000 people or something in the province of Ontario for long-term care.
Is that right? Yeah, the nursing home industry here in the U.S. would love to have that kind of a wait list, I think. They struggle still a bit with occupancy, but even more so what they struggle with, of course, is the reimbursement from the government for what we call Medicaid here. So people who basically have no financial resources. So when you look at one of these assets, there are a series of assets that are out there for sale. I know in the U.S., lots and lots of distressed properties that are changing hands. I'm guessing I don't really, there are probably people who have the numbers, but certainly in the high hundreds, I would guess right now, last year and probably this year as well. How do you evaluate a property in terms of whether or not you can make a difference, whether you can bring the value added services to turn it around?
I think there's a few things. One, location is key. We won't go into those, tertiary markets that you mentioned with 34 suites. That would be too small and too difficult to staff in Canada. Be hard to get staff, hard to get seniors. So we would only look at urban markets, secondary, like Ottawa, Montreal, Mississauga, anything in the Greater Toronto area, Greater Montreal area, a Greater Vancouver area. Like we focus on, urban centers, but outside of the urban core. So that's the first thing. The second is that they have to be value add. We don't typically acquire, high performing, 99% occupied A-class building. We don't typically do that. We do only if they're underperforming. If the rates are really low, if their occupancy is low, if there's value that we can add. Right. So I guess that's the other thing we look at. And then we look at the numbers. Obviously, how can the deal be structured? Is the price right? The numbers have to work for us because we're, private equity. So that's really the key. The numbers have to work. So if the price is over the top and there's no ability to negotiate, we pass on things as well.
Walk away. Yeah. Well, you've had a lot of growth. And in the last two and a half, 3 years, I guess.
Yeah, we started in May of 21 with we had two properties, and we now have 22.
Yeah, that's a lot of growth. So talk to me a little bit more about how the work culture at Springs and how you've evolved, what that looks like and what it's like to work there. And I guess I'd like to ask it from two perspectives. One is I'd like to ask it from the perspective of, say, the executive director, and then I'd like to ask it from the frontline worker. And I'd love to hear how you think about that.
Yeah, I think the first is we treat the executive director as the CEO of their residence. So there's no two communities the same. Even we have 5 retirement homes in Ottawa, which is a good size. It's the capital of our federal government, and no two, or even the 5 within Ottawa, are all very different. Some are more Anglophone, some are more Francophone, some are one's all AL and memory care, one's a little more independent. So the executive directors we treat as the CEOs. They know their staff, they know their residents, they know what's going to work and won't work. So they're able to customize menus. Like, we provide all the standard stuff, but it can be customized for their residents. They determine what the marketing strategy should be. So we've given them a big toolkit of levers that they can use to make it work for their community. So I think that's the first thing. And that's why they like working with us, because if they work in a larger company, they may have less autonomy or less input. So we really listen to what they have to say, first and foremost, them and their management team. They're very involved in setting their budgets, reviewing their monthly financials. They really are the CEO of that organization. And we encourage them. We've got templates for, we do annual employee engagement, obviously. We have unions. You had asked another difference between Canada and the US. 98% of our properties are unionized, and most senior living in Canada is. There's maybe 10% that isn't. And that's not a bad thing. Unions, we have a good relationship with the unions. There's a regular bargaining cycle every 3 years. You know what you're going to pay in wages. It's very clearly outlined in the collective bargaining agreement. So having a good relationship with the union, good employee relations, a lot of team member recognition. We have, regular events. We've got impact awards that we are always recognizing the value of every employee. Doesn't matter who they are, anywhere from a manager, housekeeper, reception. It doesn't matter who you are. You have a very valuable role, and we treat everyone equally. And we have a very diverse workforce, again, which we encourage and foster a lot of diversity because we're in every community. And then in Quebec, it's important because there's both Anglophone and Francophone. And so we really try to recruit bilingual, employees that can speak both languages fluently.
Yeah, I would think. And then what's it like to be a caregiver or a frontline staff in one of your communities?
Well, I think a caregiver, in fact, I was in one of our properties last week, and, we had team members that had been there for 30 years. They were so proud to have worked there for 30 years, 35 years. And they came, we take all the staff when we acquire a property. They had their uniform. They were so proud of it. They love the colors. And I think they feel valued and recognized. They've stayed with us. They didn't move on when we acquired the property, and that's very few do. Whenever we acquire a property, I've never seen a frontline team member leave just because of the acquisition. They leave when they retire or other things, but never because of the new ownership.
So I love this. This idea that they leave, that might be the sort of the signature thing you've said, right? They leave when they retire. That is certainly not, I would say, the experience that most people have the operators have in the US is just this constant turnover. Is staffing just not as big a problem in Canada as it is do you have a sense of that? I mean, do you struggle to find staff, or are you able to fill your positions?
We do. I mean, we don't want to use agency just because it's very tough to have an agency person. They don't know the residents. So we hire. We're always hiring, to replace people that have either moved away or they've gone from a part-time role to a full-time role. So we're constantly hiring and training and onboarding. I think the most difficult positions are probably RPNs. I think they're LPNs in the US.
Right.
But that's probably the most difficult. We don't use RNs because we're not skilled nursing. So we have, we need RPNs because we're doing assisted living and memory care. No. That's probably that, and cooks are probably the most difficult. Yeah. But for the most part, we're able to fill all the other roles. The other is probably sales consultants and executive directors, just because it's pretty competitive market. Everybody wants the same experienced person that loves the sector, and there's a lot of people are retiring. So those are challenges as well, and that's why we like to grow from within.
Do you find, what's the overall occupancy level in Canada? So I know you've been to Nick. So Nick shows that overall occupancy in the U.S. has gotten back up to 85, a little over 85% across both independent and assisted memory care. And that's about where it was pre-pandemic. Is it similar in Canada?
I would say we're higher. Like I think we have 5 or 6 properties that are consistently around 98, 99. And then we have a couple that are hovering around 89 consistently. Overall, our portfolio has been at 90, 91, 92% for the last almost 2 years.
Yeah, and I would say that there are some companies in the U.S. that are reaching those levels, and which means, of course, there are some that are really doing much worse than that. So, how about new development? Is new development happening in Canada?
It's rare. There are a few companies that are doing it. It's typically in larger urban centers like Greater Vancouver, or greater the Toronto area, where it's very affluent neighborhoods where seniors sell their home for a significant amount of money and they're able to afford the rent, or the monthly service fees. So, but other than that, there's not a lot of new development right now in Canada, just because it takes a long time. By the time you acquire the land and get through the zoning and fill it, it's about 7 years, or it could be more. And so that's there's not a lot of companies that have the ability to do that. So Amica's building, still they've got some great projects. There may be a couple of others, but the pipeline has really dropped off since, I guess, if you weren't in the ground before COVID, I don't think there's any new projects going since.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you guys are suffering from the same interest rate challenges. It's really essentially a worldwide problem from a development standpoint. So as you look into the future for senior living in Canada and for your company, what do you see? What's your crystal ball say?
Well, I think we're in a great position, I think, with our strategy, because we're one of the few that likes mid-market assets that we focus on value add and turnaround. So we've got a good pipeline of opportunity all the time. I think, a crystal balling 10, 15 years from now, I think in Canada, seniors are going to have a big challenge, because we have a publicly funded healthcare system, which doesn't work really well. A lot of the time, seniors have to wait a long time for hip and knee surgery, any elective surgery. It's a huge time to wait. I don't think there's going to be a lot of options for senior living, because there's lack of new supply. Our home care program doesn't particularly work well, just because of the large geographical expanse. It's very hard to get home care services in your home in a rural area. You could if it's a very urban center, but not in rural areas. It's very difficult. So the alternative is private pay home care, or senior living, or long-term care. And so, for seniors that don't have a lot of money, they're not able to afford private pay home care, unless we get a program across the country where government will help to subsidize the care for seniors that need a retirement residence. That would be one solution, which would, free up this backlog for long-term care potentially. And there's just not going to be the new long-term care stock. So the current wait list is 40,000. There's very few beds being built in Ontario. So I think 10 years down the road, it's going to be challenging for seniors in Canada, because we have it's an aging population, similar to the US. We don't have a lot of huge amount of growth. We do have a much higher immigration, I think, than the US, which is great, because a lot of those become skilled workers, like personal support workers and chefs and cooks and servers. And we really rely on that for our skilled workers.
Do you have a sort of an optimal size? Do you think that there's one of the debates that I hear people talk about a lot in the US is, does a company at some point in time get too big to be manageable? Do you have sort of a dream size?
I don't think so. I think the bigger thing for us is that we keep hiring the right kind of corporate support to make sure that we've got enough finance team, to do the budgets and the financials, that we've got enough in operations and sales to support our growth and to support the properties. That's probably more important to us, that we get that right, so that we are able to provide the right level of support. As you know, it's an operating business. And you can't just treat it like a real estate where, where you're just signing leases. It's much more involved in that, particularly when you're doing assisted living and memory care. You have to do it well. And so that would be more our focus, is making sure that we've got the right corporate structure and team to support the growth.
Yeah, that's so critical. And I think that one of the things that a lot of developers miss when they come into the business, they look at that and say, just great returns. But it's really much more of a healthcare business than a hospitality business. And that care part, we do the care part, at least when we're doing it right, it sounds like you are. The care part sort of sits in the background, and what sits in the foreground is a high quality living experience for older people. But if you don't have that background of really good supportive healthcare, you don't have anything. You don't have any value. And so this has been such an encouraging conversation. So is there anything else I should have asked you about that I haven't?
Well, I think that's a really good point that you make, Steve, and that might be the other big difference between Canada and the US senior living, is that in Canada, it's still needs-based. So seniors, in Quebec, it's a little different. Seniors will move in because they want that, and they'll move in younger to a senior living because they want the fun and the social and the friends. Whereas in the rest of English-speaking Canada, it's more of a needs-based business. So a senior won't move into a senior living until they actually need something, whether it's meals or some services or a bit of cognitive loss. It's needs-based. They won't just move in because they want the experience.
Yeah. I think the truth of the matter is that even in the US, we sort of paint this picture of it being not needs-based, that it being a lifestyle. And I think with CCRCs, that's true. But I actually think that when I talk to people who are in the trenches, they tell me that even in independent living, it's largely need-based because people are just not doing well at home, or mom and dad aren't doing well. So again, anything else I should ask you that I missed here before we're just about out of time here?
Yeah.
So.
No, I think we've covered it, Steve. I guess, I see senior living as it's a trifecta between real estate, hospitality, and health services. And you've got to have all three to provide value to the seniors. It's a growing business, and I think the demand in Canada, I kind of worry about it with the lack of supply. What over the next 15 years, what seniors are going to do when they need some care and services.
Yeah, I think we face some of that in the US. I don't think it's going to be as acute. One of the things we have here is there are something like 400,000 home care agencies. These are all private pay. And their message is stay out of senior living as long as you can. And that's going to continue to be a big competition for senior living. Although I think Nick is projecting by the end of next year that the industry will be up over 90%. And it's been a long time, if ever, since we've been there for the same reasons that you described. So anyway, Lois, thank you so much. This has been an amazing, wonderful conversation. I'm glad we got to do this again. Congratulations on your new company. Being able to have something that's more manageable, I'm sure, is a lot more fun.
It is fun. Thank you very much, Steve. Great to connect with you again.